Well, as you guys can see, or if you're listening to this just audio, as you can hear, it's just me. You guys are stuck with me because the homie Caleb is currently on vacation. I don't blame him. I wish I could go on a vacation right now. That'd be pretty cool. Because as of this recording, there is still zero internet here. Yeah, so no internet, which means I cannot upload. But this has got to be the fourth episode that has been fully done and completed and ready to go. Yeah, that pesky hurricane, man, the weather and shit gets in the way. But hey, don't worry. We're still going to have a good time. And yeah, guys, welcome. Welcome to another very special episode of the Superhero Homies podcast. Today, I will be your host throughout this holistic journey. My name is the homie Q, and I am so full of shit, but we're still going to have fun. That part I meant. A little bit of housekeeping before we get too far into things. Some things that I thought was pretty interesting here. A little bit of a cold open for you guys here. So apparently, Todd Phillips wanted nothing to do with DC during the making of Joker 2. Phillips refused to take any communication from James Gunn and would only liaise with WB heads Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdy about the film. So, this is clearly, obviously, just a rumor. Who knows? At the end of the day, I guess it doesn't really matter that much. By this point, you guys have heard our review on Joker 2. And surprise, surprise, both me and Caleb hated that movie. It was pretty bad on all accounts. And I really don't have the bandwidth right now to go back and to give you guys a rundown again as to why that movie was so poorly received. I mean, excellently shot. Todd Phillips knows how to shoot a really good looking movie, even if it is rather drab in terms of his colors and environment. But in terms of storytelling, he clearly had no story in mind here. From what I heard, they also didn't test the movie either. They didn't have any kind of test audience. And if that is true, I can see why. Apparently, a lot of people still didn't know that it was going to be a musical. But also, the marketing for this movie was lackluster as well. Todd Phillips, maybe he's trying to make a few points here, I think. For one thing, maybe he's trying to make the point of don't do useless sequels. And that may sound a bit hypocritical if that was Todd's intention because he made a sequel. But maybe he was forced to make that sequel. Maybe the WB heads looked at the $1 billion that the 2019 Joker movie made and said, hey, we want more of that. Even though the Joker movie as it stands, whether you like it or whether you don't like it, it doesn't need a sequel at all. Like it completely stands on its own merit. And if anything, making a sequel just kind of weakens the movie. There will always be people who go against the grain and people who just genuinely like things differently. I mean, Superhero Homies rule number 10, love what you love. You don't need anyone's permission to like something, all right? But with that being said, it's just interesting to see how this movie has been received. And it's interesting to see that apparently WB knew that this movie just wasn't going to do good. They're in an interesting spot right now, WB is, because how many bombs in a row is this for them now? I mean, every time a movie bombs from them, that just puts more and more pressure on Superman Legacy. That movie's due out next summer. I am looking forward to that movie, and I think it's going to be vastly different than what maybe most people are thinking, right? So I think that Superman Legacy is really going to be more of a whimsical, comic booky type movie. And if anything else, you can kind of tell by the suit. David Cornsweet, I believe, is the name of the lead actor who's playing old Clark Kent. And you look at the suit, and at least in the set photos, to me, there's just something off about the suit. I like the vibrant colors. She's got the underwear on the outside. With a lot of these cases, man, you just have to wait to see it in post. Maybe the suit will look better in post. Maybe, things will kind of clear themselves up the closer we get to the release date. But I know that there's got to be a lot of pressure on James Gunn right now because, I mean, basically, what everything from shit. I don't even know how far back to go to look at the last time that the DC side of WB has had like a win. I mean, you can't even count the Snyder Cut because that was not a theatrical release. That was, that was a straight to streaming services type thing. And as good as the Snyder Cut was, again, because it didn't have a theatrical release, doesn't really matter in the grand scheme in terms of like making WB a shit ton of money. So I really don't know. The Flash severely underperformed, as did Black Adam, as did Shazam 2, as did Aquaman 2, as did Blue Beetle. I mean, things are not good. Things aren't good. Which kind of goes back into something that me and Caleb were speaking about a few weeks ago, which is why, WB is kind of, they're in a tough spot right now because they're cutting cost everywhere across the board. I mean, they sold Batman the Cape Crusader to Amazon. I mean, think about how desperate WB has to be to sell off a Batman property. If nothing else, Batman is typically a license to print money. And even though it's an animated show, they still felt that they needed to get money from somewhere. So instead of taking the chance and airing the show on their own streaming platform, they sold it off to Amazon. They cut episodes from House of the Dragon. I mean, clearly one of their biggest flagship shows. And just to save money, they apparently cut cost on that. I'm going on a tangent here. And so I'm starting to think that maybe the problem might be me and not my co-host. But I'm going to blame the co-host anyway. Maybe if you were here, he could have reeled this in. Long story short is this. Todd, you did the unthinkable with Joker 1. And while I do not like that interpretation of the Joker, because again, it's just too far off the mark from who the Joker really is, I do like Joker 1 as a movie. I would love it if it was called anything else but Joker. But Joker 1, the 2019 Joker, was such a tremendous movie that really makes you uneasy in all the right ways. Joker, what's it called? Folie à deux. Joker Folie à deux. That movie makes you uncomfortable in all the wrong ways because it's just an awful movie. I don't know what exactly the point of this movie was. It was just another needless sequel. And I mean, hopefully, moving forward, Todd Phillips can do something better, something more redeeming. And it sucks, right? Because again, Todd Phillips did such a great job with that first Joker movie, and I think he's also the guy that did the Hangover films, right? And so, like, just imagine going from making the Hangover to making a movie like Joker, an ode to Martin Scorsese, basically. That, I think, is quite the undertaking and something to be commended. But with all that being said, enough about old Todd Phillips and Joker Folie à deux. Let's talk about some comic book live action adaptations. Oh shit, almost forgot housekeeping. Got to keep the house in order. You know what I mean? As far as housekeeping goes, guys, just want to let you know that as soon as these episodes are getting uploaded, which again, by the time you guys hear this, they will be, because I have internet again. But with that being said, it would really mean a lot to me if you guys could go to the YouTube channel, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And also, if you guys are listening on strictly on the audio platform, please leave a review for us. That really helps us in the algorithm. It helps us to get out there to more listeners, and it helps the podcast to grow. And then I'd be one step closer to taking over the world with the goddamn podcast, because who else can do that but me? And also, if you guys really want another way to support the podcast, and a really cool way to do so is to go to patreon.com/superhero homies. For just a simple $3 a month, you guys can get early access to all of our episodes. But not only that, for $3 a month, you gotta remember, Caleb and I, specifically Caleb, we're whores. And so for just $3 a month, Caleb would do some wild shit for you. But me in particular, I am willing to listen to what you guys want in particular. We have the rest of the year booked out in terms of episodes, but for the Patreoners, you guys can actually submit requests about things that you want to hear us talk about on this podcast. And for you guys, we will do so. And so, yeah, early access to content right now. And we do plan on just bringing back bonus episodes specifically for Patreon down the road. And by down the road, I mean before the end of the year. So I know I'm putting a time limit on it to make sure the shit gets done properly. And also, you guys can hear your questions, your suggestions being mentioned and discussed thoroughly, might I add, on this very podcast. And again, the best way to do that and support us is at patreon.com/superherohomies. Big thanks to you guys. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. I told myself that I will not make this a long episode because I'm just here by myself, solo dolo. I plan on trying to adhere to my own advice. So, comic book live action adaptations. There have been a lot of those over the years, right? This is specifically concerning the stories. You know, if it was about characters, then that would be basically any and all comic book based superhero movies. But this is really about comic book storylines that have been adapted into the live action format. And we have had varying degrees of success for these live action movies. And I got to say that I really do like the effort. Some have been better than others. The itinerary for this episode is first, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of these live action adaptations. And then after that, we're going to talk about what makes an adaptation good. Like, what specifically does it take to make a comic book based superhero movie good? Then we're going to give some examples, some good examples and bad examples of comic book storylines that have been appropriately adapted into the live action format, and then also some bad examples of ones that completely missed the goddamn mark. And then, of course, to cap off this episode, we'll be talking about what comic book storylines should be adapted into the live action format. And so, with that being said, there's a lot to discuss here. Let's go ahead and get into it. The pros of adapting storylines from the comic books to the big screen or the small screen, just live action. What are the pros, right? So the pros are you get to see your favorite storylines play out on the screen. I mean, that in and of itself is a big duh, right? That's one of the most obvious pros of this entire thing is that you get to see something that you've been reading for maybe years, whether it be an event or a storyline that you've gone back to time and time again. It's awesome to go to the screen and to see that thing just unfold before your eyes. You know, I think about it like this. There's, book readers, people who love to read like Tolkien's work with Lord of the Rings, or maybe even Martin's work with Game of Thrones. You know, I'm sure he'll finish it someday. But they get the opportunity to see their something that they really love to read play out in live action to varying degrees of success. And, with most of Game of Thrones to high success, and with Lord of the Rings also to high success. I think Harry Potter is another one of those things as well. You get to see all these amazing properties come to life and unfold in live action. It's always so special and so specific when it is in written format, right? Even in comic books, even though we get a visual aspect, it's different to see it being played out in motion, to see actors or to see like good CG assisting the filmmakers and really bringing these iconic moments to life. It's just fucking awesome seeing it play out like that. The other pro is the casual audience gets to experience the story. And so this is actually a really good one, a really important one as well, I think, is, let's say that you're reading Ed Brubaker's Captain America run. That run starts off with the Winter Soldier story. And imagine this back in, what was it, 2006? Imagine you're reading that and you're thinking, man, this is so goddamn cool. Hopefully one day we'll be able to not only get a good Captain America movie, but maybe we'll also be able to see Winter Soldier. And if they could somehow adapt that, this would be absolutely amazing. And then fast forward another 8 years, and we get Winter Soldier, Captain America Winter Soldier, the movie. And you see so many of those important plot points and beats play out on the big screen. And the guy next to you, or the person next to you, who's never read the comic book, they also get to experience the same shit that made you giddy reading the comic books. I think that's really cool because as comic book readers, a lot of the times, the only people we have to confide in is each other. And so when we read something that's really fucking cool, it's like, that is awesome. And unless you go online, you're going to have to find other nerds in your local area who also really enjoy reading these comic books as well in order to talk about what you just read. I think that's maybe one reason why the comic book space online isn't as toxic as it could be. It's still really fucking toxic, don't get me wrong, but it could be worse. But I think just the fact that so many people read these comic books now and that they have a place to go to talk about them is really therapeutic for a lot of people. And I get it. I, more than so many other people, definitely understand that notion, right? But the thing of it is, when a comic book storyline gets adapted into a live action format, now, if it's done well, we have other people who also get to experience that same shit. And so now, like, you have everyone to talk to. So, like, if you were a fan of Jim Starlin's Infinity War, it's another example, or Infinity Gauntlet, I should say, and then you go and watch Infinity War, everyone is now geeking out about how much of a badass Thanos is. Everyone is talking about, how cool it is to see, the big purple Titan on the big screen and see all of our heroes kind of come together and try to thwart him. So it's really cool in that regard to see. Anyways, what are the cons then of these storylines being introduced in a live action format? Well, the cons are it is always going to be up to the interpretation of the people making the movies. A lot of comic books have a through line. They have a purpose. They have some sort of meaning, some sort of message. There is something with the story that the writer is trying to convey. And sometimes when these stories are being adapted into a live action format, the people making the movie or the TV show, they either don't know or they don't care about the writer's intent in making the story. A lot of the times they seem to not have they seem to not just really give a shit. They have their own agenda at play here. And a lot of times we've seen these comic book movies being used to push some whole other different agenda than what the writer had in mind. And that always sucks. The only silver lining to that is I think that at this point in time, in late stage 2024, I think that Hollywood realizes that they're fucking creatively bankrupt, for one thing. Like, they don't have a fucking single good idea between a lot of them, it seems. And every time they veer off course and try to just freestyle this shit, they end up fucking it up. And that's such a huge issue, right? Because no one's happy. The casual fan base isn't happy because they're getting a shit product. And the people who like the original comic books that those movies or TV shows are based on, they also feel slighted because that's something that they really care about. And that's probably the only go that they're going to get at it. So, yeah, just seeing people not get what the original story is supposed to be about, that part always sucks. And there's just no way around that. So what makes a good live action adaptation? For those of you who are watching, I apologize that I'm speaking with my hands. I got two of them and I need something to do with them. Anywho, so what makes a good adaptation? Understanding the meaning of the original story. God damn, didn't I just mention that? I think I did. Yeah, so understanding the meaning of the original story, that is obviously the most important part, right? If you don't understand what the story is talking about, if you don't understand the main message, then maybe you shouldn't be the one making this. If you do have an understanding of what the story is supposed to be about, then you can do a damn good job at bringing that story to the screen. I look at if you look at some of the best MCU adaptations, i.e., Winter Soldier or Infinity War. You look at those and it's like these are not beat for beat the comic books, but what makes them good is that they understand what these stories are about. They understand the premise and intent of these stories. And so, because the people making those movies understand that on a basic level, they're able to build off of it from there. So, that's always most important. And the other thing that is really important as well is getting the tone right. Now, out of all the things, why the tone? Well, let's put it this way. One of my favorite shows ever is the Netflix Daredevil series. I think it's tremendous. I mean, I just absolutely adore that show. But you look at that show, and with the exception being season three, the other two seasons really don't pull from any one Daredevil story arc. Obviously, season three is based off of the Born Again book written by Frank Miller, not to be confused with the upcoming Born Again TV show. Anywho's, yeah, so Daredevil season three is based off of the storyline Born Again. But outside of that, you look at seasons one and two, and they're little winks and nods to certain moments in the comic books, but they aren't particularly based off of any particular comic book. But the reason why that show is such a great adaptation of just Daredevil in general is because, first of all, character integrity is non-negotiable in order for these live action adaptations to work. If you don't have character integrity, then the whole shit falls apart. So, I mean, that goes without saying. But they also understand the tone. If you read like Miller's Daredevil run or Bendis or Brubaker, so many of these Daredevil writers, they understand that the character works best with that kind of dark and gritty tone. Don't get me wrong, every once in a while you get a writer like Mark Waid who goes back to like the more happy, campy type of Daredevil, and his run is actually really good, but it's not sustainable for that who that character really is at its core. So the point I'm making here is that the Daredevil TV show understands that the tone of the comic books are really dark and really gritty and grounded for the most part. And the Netflix series just absolutely nailed that out of the park. And it felt like I was reading Bendis' work. It felt like I was reading Miller's work. That's just how good it came across to me. So yeah, the tone is very important, and obviously, like I said earlier, understanding the meaning or the messaging of the original story is always very important as well. So, what are some good examples of live action adaptations that have successfully taken comic book stories and brought them to TV or film? Well, I've already mentioned Winter Soldier. And now this is interesting, right? Because like I said earlier, Winter Soldier, it is not a one-to-one comparison to the comic books. Like you can't hold up the comic book to the movie and flip pages and see every single scene play out on the big screen. That's just not how it is. And that's not how it is for most adaptations. But the reason why Winter Soldier gets a pass for me, it's not just because I thoroughly enjoy the movie. I think that Winter Soldier is incredible. But it gets a pass for me because they understood the assignment. Like where the MCU is or was at that point, it would have been logistically impossible for them to adapt the comic book page for page, panel for panel. Like where Marvel Comics was at that time and where the MCU was at the time they made the movie, just two completely different places. So it's a logistical nightmare to try to make the comic book panel for panel come to life on the big screen. That's just implausible. On the flip side, though, if you understand the story and if you understand the meaning and the messaging of the story, then you can tell a really, really compelling story that is based off of the original comic. And that's exactly what they did. They understood who Bucky was, and they cleverly switched out certain people for other people, in the movie. Like it was Alexander Pierce in the movie. In the movie. Whereas in the comic books, it was Alexander Karpov. And that was kind of an interesting twist that they did there, that they played with the two characters. But Winter Soldier, top to bottom, the tone is correct. They understand the meaning and the messaging of the original comic book. I love it. Next up, Watchmen. Watchmen is interesting for me because this one is certainly more of a one-to-one type comparison from the comic book to the movie. Of course, the big difference being the end of the third act, where instead of a giant squid monster, it's a another fake ass Dr. Manhattan in the movie. So here's the thing, right, about that twist at the end of the Watchmen film is that I understand completely why Zack Snyder would want to go that direction, because the casual fan base probably wouldn't quite grasp or understand the giant squid monster, whereas it works tremendously well in the comic book. The Watchmen is one of those books where every time I read it, I pick up on something new, and I'm able to piece something else together that really helps the whole thing blend. And I'll be honest, I think my first time reading The Watchmen, I really didn't pick up that this squid monster was being built in the background kind of the whole time. Like Adrian Veidt was working tirelessly, gathering together all kinds of people, convincing them that they were making a huge sci-fi movie, when in reality they weren't. And then he had them all killed, and then he took that squid monster, dropped it off in the middle of New York, and it immediately exploded, killing millions of people. You guys know the story. That is so hard to tell live action, right? Caleb and I we're going to review part one of the Watchmen animated movie that is on Max. So when he gets back from vacation, that's going to be one of the first things that we do is review that. And I'm looking forward to it because I haven't seen it yet. But anyways, with that aside, though, I think that The Watchmen is a very faithful adaptation. And Zack Snyder, he really works best when he has source material to heavily rely upon, and when he does so. The shots in that movie are gorgeous. I love seeing Rorschach in live action just beat the shit out of those police officers and out of criminals in general. I think that the movie looks tremendous. I think that it captures the tone and the essence of the comic book. And ultimately, the Watchmen movie is the best live action Watchmen movie that we will ever get. It's hard to condense that story down into a 3 hour movie. Even though 3 hours is long for a movie, it's not long enough for a story like that. And I think that Zack Snyder and the team did a tremendous job. Next up, Jessica Jones, specifically season 1, because season 1 is based off of an actual story arc from the Alias comic books, and that is obviously the Purple Man arc. I picked up the Alias comic book. The Alias, by the way, that's the name of the Jessica Jones book. I picked up the Omni, I guess, a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer. But I remember reading it and just being blown away, because the last time I got to read any of it was a few years prior, and I was using the Marvel Unlimited app, and I thought it was tremendous. But at that point, the Omni had been sold out, so I had to wait for a reprint. And then when it was reprinted, I got my hands on it. Oh, hey, wait. For those of you watching, I forgot. I got this thing. This is a Jessica Jones, some kind of figurine. She's kicking over a wall because she's pissed off. Anywho, it was just sitting right there, and I was talking about it, so it's perfect. But the Jessica Jones omnibus, the Alias book, it was tremendous, and it was actually written by Brian Michael Bendis, and this was to me Bendis during his heyday, like when he was writing Ultimate Spider-Man, and that really put him on the map. And then he goes to Daredevil, to Alias, to New Avengers. But anyways, the point is that like the Alias book just felt so different from everything else that he was writing. I mean, the closest thing it felt similar to was maybe his Daredevil run. And that's because they're both kind of dark and gritty books, but Alias is a whole nother level of dark to me. And it was just such an interesting book. The other interesting thing, by the way, is that it wasn't supposed to be Jessica Jones, that he was writing about. I believe it was supposed to be Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman, but because of where she was currently in the Marvel continuity, it was just impossible for them to use her, and so he came up with Jessica Jones. Just a fun fact. Anywho, they saved the Purple Man story for the last arc in that particular omnibus. And I think that that is super effective because he's mentioned briefly all throughout, but then you get to really see what happened to Jessica during that last storyline. And that storyline is really what they use as a catalyst for the Jessica Jones season 1. And I mean, if you guys haven't seen it, go check it out. I think it's absolutely tremendous. But again, from the tone, hell, even some of the artwork that's used was taken from the comic books. And but it's not just little winks and nods. It's the portrayal and personality of Jessica, and then again, it goes back to character integrity, the non-negotiable. They understood the story and they understood the intimidation factor and the manipulation factor of the Purple Man. I think that that was probably one of the best and one of the most understated comic book to TV adaptations that we've ever gotten. And again, maybe because it's not panel for panel, people don't really count it, but I think it 100% counts as a comic book adaptation. It was tremendous. Let's see. I've already spoken about Infinity War / Endgame compared to the comic books, and I mean that one's one of the most well-known, most identifiable comic book to movie comparisons. I mean, yeah, I mean if you read Infinity Gauntlet and then you watch Infinity War and Endgame, you can entirely see the through line and where they got the ideas to do certain things from. Jim Starlin is definitely underrated. By the way, Marvel, Disney, you should fucking pay that man, as well as Ed Brubaker and all these other comic book creators who have been criminally underpaid. Just want to put that out there. Sin City. This might be the last one that I talk about for the good list because, again, I am committed to keeping this podcast episode somewhat short. Sin City, man, I think was just, not only was it an awesome movie, this is another one that, along the lines of The Watchmen, is damn near panel for panel. And there are not a lot of comic book movies that can boast that, But Sin City, heavily considered by many to be Frank Miller's magnum opus, it's an extremely gritty crime noir. And the movie doesn't hold back anything. If something is outrageously exaggerated in the comic book, that same thing is outrageously exaggerated in the movie. And this is more specifically for the first Sin City movie. I mean, don't get me wrong, the second one I think also does a really good job, but the first one is just chef's kiss. Wow, it's just iconic to me. From the look and the feel of the movie, I mean, honestly, it's one of those rare cases where I can say, if you watch that movie, you probably don't need to read that particular story in the comic book. I mean, obviously, I still recommend it as a comic book fan, but you kind of get what you get in the movie, So, absolutely, Sin City is a win, a tremendous comic book adaptation. Let's talk about some bad examples. Let's talk about all of your favorite movie that I used to rag on all the time, and recently I've done a lot better with, and that is Ragnarok. Listen, I'm not here to shit on Ragnarok today, I promise. I actually do see the value in Ragnarok, Thor Ragnarok, that is. I think that it is I think it's a very entertaining movie. It's a very funny movie, and I understand why so many people love and adore this movie. The problem is here, we're not talking about the quality of the movie. We're talking about how good this movie is as a comic book adaptation. I think in terms of Walt Simonson's Ragnarok storyline and in terms of Greg Pak's Planet Hulk storyline, it fails miserably on both aspects. I think that this movie doesn't really care to explore kind of the meaning or the hardships of those stories. It's hard to say which one gets shit on worse. It's probably Planet Hulk that gets shit on worse in the Ragnarok movie. And the idea, though, is that, even if you want to say, well, they didn't really try to adapt the Planet Hulk storyline, yeah, they did. And the reason why I'm so confident in saying that is because even if Marvel could or wanted to do a Planet Hulk storyline, they could not because there would be just way too many similarities to the Ragnarok movie. The other issue is this, and I mentioned this plenty of times as well with Ragnarok, is that the tone is off. Uh, the tone for both the Ragnarok storyline and the Planet Hulk storyline is one of dire circumstances. And you just don't get that feeling from Ragnarok. So again, I'm gonna get off Ragnarok because I know a lot of you really love that movie, and I'm not here to shit on it. I'm just saying that it is a poor comic book adaptation. Speaking of Taika Waititi, Thor: Love and Thunder. Let's go ahead and get Thor's out the way. I mean, it's not fair for me to rag on Ragnarok without talking about Thor: Love and Thunder. Obviously, this was an adaptation of Gore the God Butcher, written by Jason Aaron, and I think that storyline is by far the best thing that Jason Aaron has ever written. Like it's not even close. But you look at the Gore the God Butcher storyline, and I'll be honest, guys. In terms of Jason Aaron's work, I'm typically not a huge fan of his. Um, the same way that people say that Scott Snyder peaked with Court of Owls, which was the first thing that he wrote for Batman in the New 52. Uh, Jason Aaron peaked with Gore the God Butcher, and that was the first storyline he wrote for his Thor. But anyways, getting back on topic here, that story I think is incredible, and this movie is a huge disservice. Uh, it's uh, it's unfortunate that two really incredible and iconic Thor storylines had to have been sacrificed to get us these movies. Gore, he's not really a god butcher in this. He doesn't really seem like that big of a deal or a threat. Again, the tone is off. I mean, Taika Waititi, I hope he's doing well. He's rich, so he's got to be doing fine. But he just, I don't think that these stories were meant for him. There is definitely a place in Marvel or DC or in cinema in general for Taika Waititi. It's just I think that he's been misplaced as a director because his talents don't lend to these type of stories. This one's gonna make me a whole lot of friends here, and again, uh, the bad examples here, they're not bad movies, except for Thor: Love and Thunder. That is a bad movie, and actually a few others are bad as well. But I suffice here. Civil War, Captain America: Civil War. You probably knew it was coming. I think that Civil War is actually a really strong movie. I thoroughly enjoy Civil War. If it is on TV or if I'm just in the mood for something fun, I don't mind throwing on Civil War. Like if I'm doing a rewatch of the entire MCU, this is one of the entries I look forward to. I think it's a very well made movie. I think that it's got some iconic action set pieces. I love the introduction of both Black Panther and Spider Man. I just think that is on in so many ways. Civil War is an incredible Marvel movie, but it's a terrible comic book adaptation. I mean, it just is. Even by the MCU's own standards, they don't have the balls to stick to the premise of the Civil War, and that's just an issue. It's a big issue. It's a big old oops on Marvel's part. So, the premise of the Civil War is that there is an accident that is caused by superheroes that leads to the death of innocent people. And that incident causes the government to come into play, and they say, "Hey, we want to make this law, and this law will require all superpowered people to register with the government, give up their identities. They will receive pay and training, and they will go fight the crimes we tell them to fight. They will go do the things we tell them to do." Captain America and people who think like them say, "Hell nah." Tony Stark and people who think like them say, "Hell yeah." There's a big old fight, and it ultimately is a battle of ideologies. And Marvel doesn't stick with that for 2 hours. By the time you get to the third act, it's the Tony Stark revenge tour. It's Tony Stark being mad at Steve and Bucky. He's really mad at Bucky because Bucky killed his parents, he finds out. And then he finds out that Steve knew that Bucky killed Tony's parents. And, that obviously causes a huge rift. I love soap opera and my superhero stuff. I mean, hell, that's what most comic books are. They're just soap operas. But I think it's an incredible story to tell as well. It just doesn't have any place in a movie called Civil War. It just doesn't. Like there is no Civil War there, And I haven't even gotten to the Zemo stuff, but the Zemo stuff is so nonchalant in comparison to like the real crime of this movie, which is they don't understand or they don't care to stick to the main premise of what Civil War is all about. And so again, it becomes a thing of Tony Stark wanting revenge versus Captain America's ideology of freedom for these heroes versus Tony Stark's ideology of doing what's best for the people who we claim to protect under all circumstances. So I wish that they had stuck to that premise. And also, like, the other thing is this, right? And I promise I'll move on to the next one. But whether you like the Civil War comic book or not, you have to admit that it had lasting ramifications. Like, the impact of Marvel's Civil War had been widespread. I mean, hell, even in like Annihilation, that takes place in space. Richard Rider tried to recruit heroes from Earth. Nova tried to recruit heroes from Earth to help in this cosmic fucking war. And they were like, we can't really do it right now, man. We're kind of fighting each other, you know? But it just goes to show just how widespread this civil war had taken place. And obviously on Earth, it was 10 times worse, with the fallout of the Civil War. With the MCU, the next time we see the Avengers after Civil War is Infinity War, and that shit doesn't matter by then. So yeah, Civil War. Don't think that the MCU is the only one that has bad examples. Certainly not. Let's talk about The Flash. This, ooh boy. I mean, I don't know what else I can say about this goddamn movie that I haven't said already. When it comes down to it being an adaptation of Flashpoint, even though they don't call it that, we all know that the Flash film is supposed to be their version of Flashpoint. And it just doesn't hit the mark. So let me give an example and point something out here. I have friends who are comic book readers who don't like Civil War, and their main reason for not liking the Civil War movie is because it doesn't have the roster that the comic books do. I don't give a shit about that. That's so low on the shit that's important to me. It would have been cool had Luke Cage been involved because he was such a pivotal character, as well as like maybe Reed Richards or Hank Pym. But why wasn't Hank Pym in Civil War? Anyways, the point is this, right? Like logistically speaking, there will be so much red tape at the time, and it just would have been a fucking nightmare for them to try to match the scale of the comic books. I don't care about that. Um, to a lesser degree, I feel the same way about Reverse Flash not being in the Flash movie. I mean, I thought for sure though that he would show up because someone killed Flash's mom. Somebody killed Barry's mom, and they never find out who. Not only do they never find out who, they never hint at it. We don't get an Easter egg. We don't get a post credit scene. No cameo. No nothing. No reference via name. Nothing. Nothing. And if you're not going to use Eobard Thawne, if you're not going to use Reverse Flash, that's fine. Don't use them. All right. But you can't leave that kind of hole in your movie. Okay. And I know a lot of you may be upset about me saying that you don't necessarily have to have Reverse Flash in a Flashpoint movie. Don't get me wrong. It certainly fucking helps if he's there. But the reason why it's not pivotal is because Barry Allen is the cause of all this. Reverse Flash is just window dressing. Really cool, really assholery window dressing. All right. Who also would have been nice, but technically not necessary, is Thomas Wayne. I mean, obviously they opted out of Thomas Wayne to give us Michael Keaton's Batman. And while I didn't hate it, I didn't find it nearly as impactful as Thomas Wayne. I mean, but those things, those problems pale in comparison to the true problems of this Flash movie, being that it didn't really stick to a lot of the core meanings or values of the comic book. So we do have Barry who decides to go back in time to save his mom from who fucking knows what because they never tell us. And then he realizes that the decision he made is for the fucking worst. And so he goes, and by the end of the movie, he reverses the decision, but he has a heartfelt goodbye to his mom. They do get that right. And ultimately, that is what the Flash storyline, the Flashpoint storyline is about. It's about Barry rectifying his selfish decisions because, I mean, it sucks, right? It's a shitty situation for a superhero to be in. But they have to do the greater good. The problem is that the execution is done so poorly, you know. I don't know what they call it, the weird Flash demon monster thing that they fought. That was a no-go. The CG was horrendous. But then again, I'm not talking about the quality of the movie. I'm talking about how good of an adaptation it is. And while The Flash, honestly, is not the worst adaptation, it does more than enough to be warranted as a bad example of a proper adaptation. And lastly, the one that I'm going to talk about, but certainly not least, Secret Invasion. I'll keep this one short and sweet. It's got fucking nothing to do at all with the comic book. The only thing that Secret Invasion has in common with the comic book Secret Invasion is that there are scrolls in both of them. Point blank, period. Moving on. So, the last segment for today's episode, guys. What comics should be adapted next? You know, with the good examples and the bad examples that I gave in the previous segment, Every time I thought I was done, I thought of a new movie or TV show to add, and I had to cut myself off. I had to do the same thing with this segment here too, because there are just too many comic books that should be adapted that haven't been. Starting off, technically we have seen this one, but it was done poorly. This also should have been on the bad examples list, but I had enough of those. Didn't want to do it again. Spider-Man versus Venom. We got that back in, what was it, 07, 06, 07? And it was what it was. And I think that we can do better in 2024 moving forward. So again, this may be a thing of logistical red tape that may prevent us from getting Spider-Man and Venom on screen together. Here's the thing about this, right? Oh, by the way, another bad example is the Dark Phoenix saga. I had that one written down too, but I just didn't want to talk about it because fuck that movie, both of them, X-Men 3 and Dark Phoenix. But anywho, the problem with Dark Phoenix about that storyline, and I'm going to tie this into Spider-Man and Venom. The problem with the Dark Phoenix storyline is, as good as it is, it requires something that Hollywood does not have a lot of: creativity and patience. That's what it takes to have a good on-screen representation of Dark Phoenix. To a slightly lesser degree, that is the exact same thing with Spider-Man and Venom. In order to get Spider-Man versus Venom, we need an accurate Venom. In order to get an accurate Venom, we need a black suit. In order to get a black suit, we need to find a way for maybe Peter to be on Battle World. So maybe during Secret Wars, he gets the suit. Who knows? There's different ways for you to get the suit onto Peter. Okay? But the suit needs to go from Peter to Eddie Brock. Eddie Brock needs to have beef with Peter. And then we can go into Spider-Man versus Venom. So again, this requires creativity and patience. This requires holding out in hopes that you will get a large payoff at the end. Okay. So, but this is the MCU we're talking about here now. You know, I know that Spider-Man and Venom, they're technically owned by Sony, but whatever. I'm hoping that with the end of this next Venom movie, that maybe then the MCU will have the rights to use Venom, or at least the rights to kind of rent him out like they do with Spider-Man. That's my hope. And if that is the case, then there is nothing that's preventing Marvel from using the black suit. And again, I don't know when Spider-Man 4 comes out. I don't know if that's going to be before or after Secret Wars. But if we don't get Spider-Man 4 until after Secret Wars, then I feel like it's kind of a layup. Peter gets the black suit on Battle World during Secret Wars, and then in Spider-Man 4, we see Peter and how this suit is slowly changing him. In Spider-Man 4, that's when you also introduce Eddie Brock. And then maybe by the end of Spider-Man 4, he gets rid of the symbiote. And then in Spider-Man 5, we have the symbiote go on to Eddie. And then it just depends on how long you want to stretch it out, because you can do Spider-Man versus Venom by Spider-Man 5, or I can see them stretching it out to Spider-Man 6. Like, they have options. But the point of the matter is this: the MCU is the only company that has really given us long-term storytelling. If Fox had the foresight to do that, then they could have given us a really good Dark Phoenix saga on the big screen. But, you know, it that didn't pan out, clearly. And it's going to take similar patience and creativity in order to give us a proper Spider-Man versus Venom. And I think that we as fans deserve to see that. Next up is a story by the name of Marvels. Not to be confused with that shitty movie that we got last year. Marvels is actually it's just it's one of my favorite Marvel stories. Point blank. Period. It's incredible. And again, it makes me upset that they named that shitty movie The Marvels. Like, you guys know you have a great iconic story called Marvels, and then you go and name that movie that. Anywho, I digress. Marvels is strictly from the POV of a reporter named Phil Sheldon. As a matter of fact, if you guys played that Avengers video game that was out a few years ago, he actually cameos in that. But anyways, what Marvels is about is it is from the POV of this reporter as if the big events that have happened in Marvel Comics happened canonically in real time, right? So it starts off in the golden age in the 40s, and it starts off with the original Human Torch and Namor and Captain America and like the whole Invaders arc back from the golden age, and you get to see what that war looks like from his POV. And more importantly, you get to see and feel how the people in the Marvel universe felt and reacted to these things happening. You get to see Phil and his relationship with Nick Fury pre-war. We get to see like how fucking epic the Human Torch versus Namor fight would have looked from a normal person's POV. But it doesn't stop there. It goes on to the Silver Age. We see Reed and Sue Richards get married. And how, because that was a huge deal in Marvel Comics. And so obviously it's a huge deal within the Marvel Universe. We get to see the mutants hit the scene. And that's probably my favorite part of the book. I mean, it's just, I can't speak highly enough of it. But it's all about how the world is evolving and changing and how people are reacting to the changes around it and what things look like from his POV. The culmination of the story, or I should say the climax of it, is he being Phil Sheldon, the main character here. He speaks with Gwen Stacy concerning the death of her dad, and I mean, I guess spoiler alert, but he talks to Gwen and he is just enamored with her, not in like a sexual or romantic kind of way, but just finding a pure soul in a world where that seems to be a commodity that you don't find anywhere in anyone. But she just seems like such a good and pure person that she changes his perspective on a lot of things, including Spider-Man, things of that nature. But then shortly thereafter, Gwen is tragically killed by the Goblin, and that kind of breaks Phil, and he has to bounce back from that. But it's just a beautiful and an amazing story. I recommend everyone read this. I typically don't care how you guys read the comics. I don't care if you read it digitally. I don't care if you read the trade paperback. I don't care if it's an Omni or an oversized hardcover. I don't care how you guys read it. But with Marvels, I do need you guys to read the oversized hardcover deluxe edition, because that comes with an epilogue. And if you are a fan of Chris Claremont's X-Men, the epilogue will mean a lot to you. It meant a lot to me. I really dug it. So how does the MCU adapt a story like Marvel's into live action? Again, this requires a ton of creativity, but it can certainly be done. I think that if Marvel ever has the idea to do a soft reboot on their canon, that this should be the last project they do before they do so. Because the comic book Marvels, is a love letter to all of Marvel Comics. And I think that doing like a special, like the holiday special or Werewolf by Night, I think doing a special called Marvels based off of the comic book would be a love letter to the MCU. And the way I would do it is, instead of starting it off with the original Human Torch and Namor back in the 1940s, you have it start with, again, Phil Sheldon, and maybe he's there at the press conference when Tony Stark says, "I am Iron Man." And then maybe it goes to him getting to the scene when the Hulk is fighting Abomination. And then maybe he gets to see the Chitauri Battle of New York during Avengers 1, and we get his perspective on that and his POV. And you just keep it going like that. The idea is to not just capture the big moments. The idea is to understand what those moments would have meant to the people, the everyday person like you and me, who would be living in that world and their interpretation of it. Like, it's hard to do that story justice. You just have to read it if you haven't read it. But I do think that it would be incredible to see that played out live action. Moving on here, Superman for all seasons. For those of you who may be long-time listeners of this podcast, you've been around to see me make some interesting developments. In the start of this podcast back in 2017, I was kind of antagonistic towards Superman. Just didn't really like the guy, the fucking Boy Scout. Can do no wrong. And then I became indifferent to Superman. And now I've come around to Superman. He's incredible. There's a reason why he is one of the most well-renowned superheroes of all time. Why he's one of the most beloved superheroes of all time. In the right hand, Superman is just he's the guy. He's incredible. From reading The Death of Superman, like as an adult versus as a kid, to reading the Superman run by Peter J. Tomasi, that was just it's the best Superman run that I've read. So reading that Omni was incredible. All Star Superman was another incredible book, and there's just been so many different instances and times where I've read incredible Superman stories. But the one that, oddly enough, impacted me the most was Superman for All Seasons. As a matter of fact, you guys probably see that one. It's somewhere on this shelf behind me here. One of these back here. I picked that book up because I realized that was the only book by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale that I'd never read. And they released an absolute version of it. And so I said, well, that gives me an excuse to definitely buy it. So I picked it up and I read it a few months ago. And I just think it's absolutely incredible. Superman for All Seasons, on the face of it, is a very simple story. It's a very simple story that is full of heart. And it's not about the actions. It's not about the feats of Superman. It's about who this guy is at the heart of the matter. And, at this point, Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, they just work so well together. This story came out, I guess, probably 30 years ago now, somewhere around there. But by that point in their career, they just know how to work so well together. So it is, I think it's a beautiful book. I think that the Superman Legacy movie should have been based on Superman for All Seasons instead of All-Star Superman. But you get to see Superman in all seasons. And of course, the seasons are both literal and metaphorical, as you can imagine. But yeah, again, I think that there's not a whole lot I can say about this story. It is, again, it's hard for me to do it justice, but I think that it is just absolutely an incredible story. I think that in terms of getting to know who Superman is, this is where I would start people if it were up to me. I would have them read Superman for All Seasons first before I had them read anything else. I think that this book perfectly encapsulates who Superman is. And that's all the reason I need to have this be on the list. I know it's too late in production, like Superman Legacy is already done filming, but damn it, man, do I wish they could have based that movie off of All Star Super. I mean, off of Superman for All Seasons. All right, let's keep it moving here. This next one, The Dark Knight Returns. I would love to see The Dark Knight Returns in live action format. I would make this an Elseworlds movie. In other words, I would have it be disconnected from the DCU. Reason being is because The Dark Knight Returns isn't connected to the comic books. It is a non-canonical book. So I don't see why they should tie this story in to the DCU. I would leave it as its own separate thing. So it's in the same way that like Matt Reeves, the Batman movie, is not connected to the DCU, you know. I would have not Scott Snyder. I have Zack Snyder make this movie. Because of how good of a job he did with both Watchmen. Obviously, that's an Alan Moore story, but also how good of a job he did with 300. That is a Zack Snyder story, and you can tell that there is an itch for Zack to do this movie. I mean, hell, he said as much that he wants to do a Dark Knight Returns, and I think he should. I think that when the story is already there and laid out for him, Zack Snyder can take that and make fucking magic in a way that not very many people can. I think that the desire for most filmmakers to put their own twist on it or their own spin on it is so high, whereas Zack seems to have more of the desire to take what has already existed in comic book format and as best he can bring that to the big screen. I think you maybe give him 2 movies to do it, just like the animated movies. You know how there's a part 1 and a part 2 to The Dark Knight Returns. I think you do that. I think that the shots alone that he get would be goosebump inducing. You know what I mean? Like that shit would be fucking popping. So I'm here for that. I would love to see a live action Dark Knight Returns before I leave this mortal coil. All right. Next up, and I'll tell you what, this has been going on for an hour, over an hour now, so this may be the last one that I do. X-Men, God Loves, Man Kills. This one would certainly be interesting for them to do, but I think that if Marvel has the balls to commit to this story, it'll be tremendous. For those of you who are not familiar with God Loves, Man Kills, I think this story started off non-canonical, but then as time went on, I believe Marvel then made it canon. But yeah, they had to make it canon because Stryker, so duh. Anywho, this is the story of William Stryker. This is the story of a man named Stryker. He was a bigot and a racist and a preacher. Anyways, you guys get the idea. Yeah, William Stryker, you guys I'm sure know him from the X-Men movies, but he is, while I do believe he has a military background, he is primarily a evangelicist. And just right off the bat, the point here of the story is not to bash on religious folk. And so that alone is a very interesting thread to bear if you're the MCU trying to make this movie. But what he does is he weaponizes his religion and he uses that as a reasoning for his bigotry. The movie has very, very strong undertones to the point where they're not undertones, they are overtones. The reason why God Loves, Man Kills is so good is because this is one of the rare exceptions where Chris Claremont, he does make bold statements and, there aren't little nuanced messages. They're very much hitting you over the head as to what this story is about. And thankfully, this is really one of the only times that he was this forward facing with like his messaging. Because if you try to do this too many times, if you go back to this well too many times, then it's gonna turn quickly for the worse. But because God Loves Man Kills is such a short and simple and impactful story, it works so well. But again, a lot of the imagery is very hard. I mean, this comic starts off with a bunch of, I think they're called the Purifiers, Strikers people. They're hunting down two mutants, and the mutants happen to be two black children. And by the time Magneto finds them, the children are dead and they're being hanged. And I mean, so just again, the imagery alone is very disturbing. I guess a bit of a trigger warning. Probably should do that earlier. But that just goes to show you like the type of story that we're dealing with here. And again, is very forward facing and thinly veiled. But it again is a very strong and impactful story. I think that in this day and age, God Loves Man Kills, if done properly in live action, will elicit the right emotions from the right people. I think that it would remind people again what the X-Men is kind of all about. And yeah, I think that it would also just be a really bold story to tell. You need a hell of a filmmaker to do it though. And you need to have the balls to stick to your convictions with a story like this. And you have to be able to walk that tightrope of keeping it G, but not making it so over the top that people feel like they're being preached to. You need to keep it G without feeling preachy. You know what I mean? So it will be an interesting story to tell. And I think that if they can do it right, it would be really, really fucking amazing. I think it'd be one that people remember for a long time. So that's where I'm going to end today's episode, guys. Interestingly enough, this episode is almost as long as our Joker review. We had nothing to say for that goddamn Joker 2 review. Filet adieu. Homies, thank you guys for sticking around and for listening to this episode, talking about live action comic book adaptations. There's a lot of episodes to have in the tuck to do in case I don't have a co-host for whatever reason. But don't worry, guys. My co-host Caleb, he is coming back really soon. We do have episodes coming down the pipeline. Trust me, even more episodes coming down the pipeline. Like I said, I think that the rest of our year is kind of booked up for us. But don't forget, if you guys really want to hear your topics that you thought up of being discussed on the podcast, the way you can do that, go to patreon.com/superhero homies. And if you sign up for Patreon, you will be able to hear us address your topics here on this very podcast. And hell, we might talk about it more than we did Joker 2, filet adieu. But with that being said, guys, thank you guys again for listening in. I really do appreciate all of you guys. As always, though, if you have any kind of questions, comments, gifts, threats, food, supplies, you can hit us up at superherohomies@gmail.com or any of the social media outlets. Again, big thanks for being here. Hope you guys have fun. I had a blast, but then again, I always have fun. I love speaking into the abyss, just as long as the abyss doesn't speak back. I will see you guys next time, but until then, my name is Superhero Homie Q.